The place to be is living free in Tennessee.
Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Friday, November 10th, 2023, and this is episode 814 of Living Free in Tennessee, and it's a Friday show. So it's Homestead Happenings. We didn't do one last week because unlike every other time in my life when I go out of town and he can do it, the redneck did not want to hijack my podcast. So why didn't you hijack the podcast, Tactical?
I don't even remember what I was doing on Friday. Like, I was busy.
You were busy. Make sure you're talking to the thingy. So anyway, guys, this is how this works. If you have questions in the live feed, put the word questions in all caps, or question singular, or comment, and then the rest of your thing can be in lowercase, whatever, just so I see it. This is going to be a discussion more today. We're going off script. So I will cover a few segments today, and I have the show notes over here on my other monitor, but we had a pretty interesting discussion this week as we were driving to town to do errands. It was the great day of errands, and it was sparked by something happening in the neighborhood where a house was listed for sale at a price that seems completely astronomical to me. And then it spurred the question, well, what if that does sell for that price? And it was a discussion that was pretty good. I thought we're just going to kind of recreate it. It won't be exactly the same. We'll just, because we've both had time to think ever since then, but we're going to have that discussion. Before we jump into that, I have a few segments queued up and some stories that Tactical needs to tell. He doesn't even know what they are. I just told him we were just going to go for it today, and we didn't do show notes together. So it's all surprises for Tactical today. Surprise! Do you like surprises?
Not really.
Not really. So that ought to be interesting. Before we do that, I want to thank our two sponsors of today's show. The first sponsor is Hollow Roast Coffee. Hollow Roast Coffee makes a great Christmas gift delivered straight to the door of the person you ship it to anywhere in the U.S. or APO or FPO addresses. If you really want to get a jump on things, though, you can send me a spreadsheet with addresses, a note you want me to write, and we get them all produced, handwrite the cards, and then ship them out about the first week of December in time for Christmas. Check out hollowroast.com to see all we have to offer. Email me, Nicole@livingfreeintennessee.com, if you want to do your own custom coffee. And of course, now that I've said coffee 3 times, I have summoned the need to take a drink of coffee. Drink! Okay, second sponsor of today's show is Harvest Right freeze dryers. If you're looking for a really big gift to get somebody, Harvest Right has a freeze dryer for you, and I have an affiliate link which is in the show notes, or it's harvestright.com/1095.html. You can check that out. I get a little commission if you get those, but the Harvest Right freeze dryer has been an integral part of how we preserve food here, and I was just thinking about doing them as a sponsor today, just in exchange for affiliate revenue, because it's time for me to start freeze drying stuff again. And I was like, well, maybe if I start talking about freeze drying, I should let people know about the affiliate program. With that, we're going to go straight into the content for today's show. Don't forget, guys, if you want to ask a question, go for it. First, we have forage. What have you been foraging?
Nothing.
Nothing. Why?
Everything did freeze.
Everything froze. We got our first frost. I left the tomato vines in front of my house up to see what would happen, and they sure enough got nuked. My banana tree is nuked. In fact, we need to cut the leaves off before tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I got to do some mulching with that banana tree before it plunges back down to 30 degrees tonight. So it pretty much wiped out just about everything here. My aquaponics system has like Swiss chard and some other greens that are still alive. But the forage we're getting at this point is underground. So Jerusalem artichokes, it's about time that you can start harvesting those because we've had the first frost. Anything underground. Sassafras root. Right about now is not a bad time to start. A little later in the season for that means more sugars are in the roots of the sassafras tree. I just bring that one up because I wanted to say sassafras because it's kind of hard to say without lisping. Can you say sassafras?
Sassafras.
He can say sassafras without lisping.
Redneck.
High five. Okay. Next up, we have livestock. This is where we talk about what's going on with the livestock in the Holler Homestead. I didn't list them all out today, But we did have baby rabbits. We had one have only one rabbit, or she had multiples and they died and she took care of the evidence. And she kind of snuck that one in on us. So then he threw a nesting box because she gave birth without a nesting box. He threw a nesting box in both where the females are, and the other one had baby bunnies. A couple days later, I went down there yesterday. There were multiple little wiggles in there, and I just sort of left them alone because when they're this young, I just sort of let the mom do what the mom's going to do. Anything else on the rabbits?
No, that's basically it for them.
Let's talk about sheep. What's up with the sheep, Tactical?
They're being sheep.
Okay, but wasn't there a funny ram story last week?
I don't remember what
there
that
is.
was.
You told me a ram story.
Which one?
It was something about the two rams. Were they hijinking you or hijinking each other?
I don't remember.
He doesn't remember. We have a great ram story that he doesn't remember. When you moved the rams, did they do anything interesting last week?
I have no clue what you're talking about.
Well, tell us what's up with the sheep for real, because there is some stuff up with the sheep.
Do have one of the ewes that kind of looks like she's pregnant. She should be pregnant. She has a little bit of an udder. She was acting like she was in labor, but like her udder doesn't appear to be big enough for that. Like it's just kind of weird. So other than that, I mean, like it's interesting watching the babies. We've got 2 female and 1 ram, and the ram is getting bigger a lot faster than the 2 females. Then also realizing that like we need to tag sheep because out of the previous babies, like it's getting close to time where it's going to be hard to tell the difference between khaki and cloudy. Like they're getting size-wise close enough that like, and they've got the same kind of not dreads, but like that really almost more wool hair than hair. I don't know how to describe that.
Anyway, they look alike.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this is important because Cloudy is destined for the butcher. And the only reason she hasn't gone to the butcher yet is that it is deer hunting season, and I didn't feel like processing her. So getting a custom butcher who also does deer processing during deer season to do a lamb is possible, but they're not super thrilled about it, and I can wait until January. Or we can just eventually process here if we decide to do that. But I didn't originally think we were processing her, and then I realized we have no idea who her father is.
Yeah.
And then that's complicated because we're keeping the 2 rams. So Kay Kim says, I keep going back and forth on whether we want sheep or goats. It'll be the first big animals on the homestead. If you want to learn a lot about fencing, get goats. A lot about fencing. Also about what they can do when they stand on your car, climb on your roof, eat your blueberry patch. I'm just throwing this out there that maybe you want to think about that real carefully. The sheep we have eat underbrush. So a lot of people will go goats because they want them to eat the underbrush. Goats eat more underbrush than the sheep. And I love my goats and they're fun. But unless you're really, really ready to do goat knocks in fencing, you might want to start with a couple sheep. That being said, something he said occurred to me. So one of the ewes was acting like she was in labor, but she's not in labor. And this is a sign to start looking at the animal who is behaving differently for medical problems. Because what will happen with sheep and with goats is they will not show you that they're sick until they're so sick they probably die. And so any slight change in behavior, like retreating from the rest of the herd, is something to be paid attention to. And we had a friend recently go through a pretty harrowing experience with her ewe. The ewe lived, but was a week in need for supportive care, not like IV supportive care, but constant watch, isolation, like needing to up every couple hours at night, making sure the goat or the sheep the ewe was standing. I used the word sheep as a singular, and that's incorrect because it's plural of the thing. So she made it through, but it just made me think, like, the sooner you can get to it, the better. And when your animals start acting funny, I mean, it could mean just that the season changed, but it could also mean like, hey, is there a parasite load? Does somebody have a cold? Like, what else? Like, how's their poop look? Is it diarrhea? Because diarrhea in sheep is not awesome. Are they looking puffy? Is there bloat happening? All of those things. It was something I was thinking about when he said that, because originally when he said she was acting like she was in labor, I was like, oh, I better go over there and look at her, because I wasn't expecting somebody to be pregnant or delivering right now. So, I wanted to see what was up with that.
And that was also my first thought was labor. And then when I actually went over to, check on her, it's like, you don't look pregnant enough to be in labor. So I'm kind of wondering what else might be up.
Yeah. Okay, next segment is homegrown cooking. This is where we talk about what we're cooking from the homestead. And Tactical, is there anything major happening in my house this week?
No.
Tactical, tell the truth.
All the major stuff's done.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
What have we been working on?
Tearing out a third of your house.
Yeah, so we ripped out a third of my house. Alyssa came down and was involved in ripping out the joists in the floor and exposing what she refers to as my house's understory. And I was like, understory? Is that a word? She's like, well, it's not a basement and it's not a crawl space, so it's your understory. And I have moved into a camper. In fact, we almost broadcast from the camper today because I want to show you guys the glamper. I'm going to do that alone next week because it's just a little bit too much to fit us in there and get good audio and get the lighting right. And I was like, never mind. It's the easy button is the studio, and I've got to get orders into the mail and then drive 2 hours away and 2 hours back to do a thing today. So, and we got a guy coming at 11 to look at the drywall. Yeah. But, so that's going on. What that means is that cooking the usual harvest meals is not super convenient. How well did you eat while I was gone?
Not very.
Why?
I was busy.
Because he was busy. Why else? Was it hard to cook in my kitchen?
I don't think I cooked in your kitchen at all.
Yeah.
Well, aside from the meatloaf, which went in the oven.
Yeah, so I made him a 10-pound meatloaf before I left. He ate 3 pounds the first day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
But I came home, and what he didn't know is I had a super secret second meatloaf in the freezer. So we had that. And then it's just been about planning around. It's not like the problem isn't so much that my kitchen is locked up, although it is kind of locked up. Somehow all my spices got packed and they're no longer here. So
I know how that happened.
I know how it happened too, but which is fine, except for then when I'm like, I need to cook a thing, I'm like, I want to add a spice. I'm like, oh, I have salt, pepper, garlic right now. Yesterday, I had to borrow rosemary from him, or 2 days ago when we made shepherd's pie. So I've been doing a lot of crock pot meals. We are about to get into the time of drywall where they sand. And what that means is that you get a fine talcum powder consistency dust everywhere, no matter what you do. So I'm moving the coffee maker into the camper, the crock pots in the camper. And today we have from pre-cut kits that we made, the Holler neighbors made. We got together over a couple weekends and just were like, what crock pot meals are good? You take meat, you add this thing. And we like made a package of, I'm going to say in air quotes, this thing. We have the Mississippi pot roast seasoning going in with pork roast, not a beef roast, in the crock pot in the camper right now. So it'll just come straight out of the crock pot ready to go. And the other thing we have going on is that a half cow has arrived from the Gorham Homestead. So I was really fortunate that Eric Myers was driving close to the butcher. And then the butcher, he stayed after closing for like 2 hours to meet Eric, hand over the half cow. And then that's now here. So that is also in the freezer. And this means that we are now playing the game of freezer Tetris again. And if a venison shows up in the next 2 weeks, which one probably will, I have to be really careful about that. As a result, what I'm doing to the best of my ability with my kitchen sort of at half mast, is pawing through the freezer for things that I've put off cooking and getting rid of them. That's why you had shepherd's pie this week.
Yeah.
Do you know what I was getting rid of?
Ground beef?
No, that was ground lamb.
Oh.
I was getting rid of the roasted Cushaw squash from last year because the squash are so huge. I roasted it all and then put it in little smaller packages in the freezer. And I thought, well, shepherd's pie with ground lamb would be great. And that uses up that ground lamb. But then also I can put a few potatoes on there and then squash instead of potatoes. I didn't even mash the potatoes. I just hunked them up. So it's probably not really shepherd's pie. And I had gravy to make from the drippings from the meatloaf. And I had gravy that I had made for the second meatloaf from the drippings of the second meatloaf. So all of those things combined together where I could just add some peas and some cheese, which rhymes and sounds like it should be a song. And we had shepherd's pie, and we've eaten that for 2 days. So what's your feedback on the weird approach to shepherd's pie?
Tasted good.
Yeah, he's been eating a lot of shepherd's pie. And I tell that story because you hear how I'm pulling all the pieces from all the other meals into one thing. Green tomatoes were harvested right before I went to Jack Spirko's. And what I do with those is I leave them on the counter and let them ripen as best they can. So we've been having fresh tomatoes with just about every meal. We've got another whole set of them today. And if they come on too fast, I'll hunk them up and throw them in the freezer until I have enough to process into salsa or ketchup or tomato sauce or whatever. But at this point, they're doing really well. I'd say fully 50% of what I harvested before Jack's has now gotten ripe. And we have a nice big heart-shaped tomato tonight for dinner. So I'll probably put some balsamic on that and maybe some dried basil, because we don't have fresh basil anymore, do we? Do you have any in the house?
I don't have any in the house.
Yeah,
I'll have to look at what I have in my
I just don't think there's any way basil made it through the last few frosts. If there's basil leaves, get them, because it'll be like the last tomato basil balsamic salad of the year.
Walk down there and go look right now.
I also look forward to the first basil balsamic tomato salad, but it's one of my favorites. And then I've already started tapping into my canned goods. So we've had green beans a few times. I ended up canning more green beans than I needed this year, which is fine. But one of the things that a lot of newer homesteaders run into is, when do I start using my canned goods? Because you've put all of this labor into canning your food, and then you've put them on the shelf and they look really pretty up there, and you're like, you feel accomplished, and it gives you a feeling of security and food security. And then you're like, well, I don't want to open it. Let me tell you what happens if you don't open your canned goods. You end up at the end of the season in about 3 months from now or 4 months from now, when you're starting to get stuff off your garden again, with unused canned goods that go bad. So my philosophy on the canned goods, unless there's something in particular I'm keeping for a holiday meal that's special, is if I want it, we cook it. And if halfway through the winter I run out, so be it. Then I will tap into the commercial food system and deal with it. I'm not going to run out, though. Like, unless we're feeding more people than we feed here right now, I am not running out of canned goods. And when I changed to that approach, I stopped having 5-year-old jars of canned corn around and that sort of thing. We just use it, and I think it's better to use it. With that being said, it's time for the whole reason everybody's actually here, and that is the $519,000 discussion. A lot of people have kept their eyes on my road just to see if they can buy land nearby, because that's how the hauler neighbors have come to be, right? Is people buying land nearby. And the other day on my way to the airport, I saw a sign on the side of the road that said "For sale" by my neighbor Liza's house, also known as the Peacock House. And I was like, is Liza selling? I doubt it. It's probably, there's this house, like, you have to drive through her driveway to get to it. There's a right of way, and then it's up behind on the ridge. And The last time it sold was 2021, and it was only on the market for what, like a week? I think you tried to get that one, and it went so fast that he couldn't.
Well, it's like the driveway is weird because it goes right next to her house, and she's got stuff. She parks on the other side of the driveway, and it's an awkward setup for getting up there.
Yeah. And the reason that happened is she built the house for her mother.
Yeah.
And it used to be her property, and then it got separated from her property. Mama Sauce, hello. And I looked it up, like Nighthawk was driving me to the airport. I looked it up online to see like what the MLS had it listed up, and the sign was up, but the MLS listing was not up. So I had no idea. And the next day I get a text from Tactical at Spirko's house with a link to the MLS. And I'm like, I know exactly what this is. And I clicked on it, and I swear it said $529,000.
Mm-hmm.
It did. Okay. It said $529,000 for a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom home on 4.2 acres. And the acres are super steep and rocky. Like you are terracing a garden and probably doing raised beds there if you're gonna try to work that property from a homestead standpoint. And you have to have a right of way through somebody's house. They do have city water connected, but what had happened is somebody bought it in 2021 for like $120,000-ish, and it does look like they've done some like updating and remodeling, and now it's listed for $529,000. And all I said to Jack, who was near me when I said, it's like, if that sells for $529,000, my place is worth $1.2 million. If my place is worth $1.2 million, despite the fact that blood, sweat, and tears has gone into this place for 16 years, I'm going to think really carefully about selling. And then I asked him what he thought about selling if I could get 1.2 million for this. So what do you think? Let's just start the conversation like we're having the conversation. So Tactical, what would you think if I sold this place for $1.2 million?
I think we get to start from scratch.
What's that mean?
That means we get to build what we want.
So what would that look like? What would we look for?
I mean, from my perspective, my criteria needs to be some source of water on the property, enough decent acreage to be able to build house, cabin, event space, barn. I would want at least 15 to 20 acres for pasture, plus some woods. And then, anything after that is just bonus.
So how would you build your house in that scenario? What would you build it out of? Would it be off-grid, on-grid? Like, would you use alternative building materials? What are you thinking?
I would probably... it would be off-grid. That's for sure. Because I already know that my power usage is not excessive. It would be useful to have grid power on the property for, a workshop building. So for running, table saws, and I would like to get a router and a planer. So stuff like that. But that can be done with a generator. So grid power would be nice, but I would be off grid. I would be using probably a lot of natural material. So, some rock as foundation pieces. Like here specifically, the part of the country we're in, I would probably be digging down to slab rock and pouring straight on top of that.
So if I moved, you would want to move with me onto the property that I went to?
That would be the plan.
Okay. And Jenny says, yurts for the win. So from my perspective, if I was going to start from a blank slate, I would want probably 16 to 20 acres with a water source where I don't have to hear road noise. I don't hear road noise here. So that's one of the things I really like. I'll hear motorcycles in the summer and I'll hear ambulance sirens when the motorcycles crash up on the ridge. But Usually it's pretty quiet. We don't have a lot of people driving through here, especially since the church turned into a house. There used to be church. We used to have traffic Sunday morning and Wednesday evening, but then that church got sold in 2 parts and now it's somebody's house, and that's just a couple of people rather than the entire congregation. But I really, if I could have my property designed the way I absolutely wanted to from a blank slate, there would be a big event center that has a badass kitchen with a decent, like maybe a rocket mass heater or a fireplace or kind of both, because our weather's not necessarily conducive at the transition times, which last for months here, to having heat pumping into a place for 2 weeks or a week once you've gotten a mass heated up. Like that works for the winter months, but something more short term that then isn't also pumping heat when it suddenly went from 30 degrees to 80 degrees would be nice. And like kind of big and open and able to do canning classes and cheese classes in my spring workshop, have it like with these alternative building approaches integrated. So the solar water heater, something like a rocket mass heater, maybe a rocket mass water heater, because they've done some of that, which is kind of cool. I'd be looking at maybe a methane system for dealing with waste in addition to some outhouses around, so that we can see like, this is how you turn waste into methane. This is how much methane, because they say you get like 2 hours a day off of one of those from 2 people of methane gas, and I don't believe it. I believe that's in ideal situations in the middle of summer. So what happens in the winter, right? And then to be able to, like with $1.2 million. So context, guys, is I owe $9,000 on my property right now. And the only reason it's not paid off is that my interest rate is so low, it's not worth paying it off. So that would I would have a tax ramification from that, first of all. And then that would put money in my pocket to be able to just get like Ferguson out here to do all of the permaculture stuffs at once.
Yeah.
Like maybe not all at once, because that doesn't necessarily but the major stuff, like the hard part for me spiritually is that I feel very connected to my land here. Like just a geothermal linked event space, maybe. Yeah, geothermal is actually pretty feasible here. And it's something that I've already laid the pipe for at my house, come to think of it. I forgot about that when I was looking at putting a mini split in. I should remember that we're supposed to be doing geothermal here. But it would put enough money in to do all the build quickly. And we have the contacts to do a build quickly. The sad part is I just put in a food forest, and I think maybe next year might be the first time I get something besides herbs from the food forest and strawberries. And then once again, I'd be hitting the reset button on sort of the longer perennial sorts of food things. And the other thing is, I don't believe in just rolling out any property like that. But I know we could start with the event center, that. So I think I'd end up living in a camper for a while and just concentrate, get the event center, have a studio in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And get the gardens going and all of that, and some badass aquaponics.
Yeah.
Hey, I just met a dude who does potent ponics, Steven Reisner. He knows his stuff.
Yeah.
That dude knows his stuff. He lives 2 hours from here, which is pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah. So Strong Resources literally would not sell our land for any price, but I'm 4th generation. So the funny thing about that, Carrie, is I thought I was that person until the number $1.2 million came up, and I realized that right now in Tennessee, you can still buy land for a few $100,000 of the, size I'm talking about, with a integrated water. The problem is, if you want to buy land with the infrastructure on it, you're looking at a lot more money at the moment, which is what they're banking on with that house, I think.
Yeah.
In Tennessee, it's cheaper to buy raw and build than it is to buy built right now, which is weird. It's upside down
right now.
Yeah.
And one aspect with that is, in Tennessee, if you want somebody that actually is going to do something the right way, it's very difficult, and they are backed up forever.
No, what you do is you bring drywallers down from Kentucky, and they do it in 4 hours. I never spent so much money in 4 hours as I did yesterday when the drywallers came down, and with a big smile on my face, got it hung and the first tape and mud done. I was like, yes, that went fast. Also, money, that went fast. They were reasonably priced, I think. But yeah, it was.
Yeah. And I mean, there's an aspect of what Carrie said, when you're fourth generation on a property, that's one thing. Like for me, I'm not as invested in this property as you are, but at the same time, I am still pretty invested in it. But if we did pick up and go to a different property and start doing the same thing, it's like this was just a learning experience. And I can do the same thing that I've done over the course of 4 years on this property, on a new property in a year or two.
So for me, I'm in a love the one you're with situation with this property, where I do love the property. I have felt a spiritual connection with this property since before I bought it. Like, this was totally an emotional purchase. And there are a lot of things about this property that are not ideal for what I'm doing. It's very hilly. It's very rocky. It does have good water, so that's nice. It's 3.2 acres, which is smaller than what I would have wanted. And there have been periods of time throughout my time here where I've looked around saying, I want more acreage. I want acres that I can actually work fairly easily with a tractor versus this situation, which is possible with a tractor, but is it ideal?
Oh, no.
The reason we don't use poultry netting here is because it works poorly on hilly areas. Like poultry netting, like a gentle slope, sure, but if it's going up and down, which is what it does here, it's not great. I tried it really hard. I was like, everybody's telling me poultry netting's the way to go. Not the way to go here. Goat netting, not the way to go here. Sheep netting, which is goat netting, not the way to go here. That's why the sheep are trained to strands. Luckily, Dawn did that for us before we bought them. Huh?
I said anything with the word net in it.
Not a good idea. So there have always been some things about this property that I've always thought, like, I wish it wasn't that way. And because that's there, then finding, having the conversation about if I could sell it for $1.2 million or even $1 million, as long as I can get something else, as long as everything else around me isn't $2 million, then I'd be open to that, which probably sounds really weird because I've been doing a podcast for like 7 years about this land and developing this land. And I've been building on this land for 16 years, which is a long time. That's a significant part of my life.
Yeah.
Cece has joined the podcast. So
Cece is whining. Like
Jen Hill asks, would you want raw land? And I think if I sold the homestead, and unless something was already built with that vision of the event center already, I would get raw land so that I could build it out the way I wanted to. And the trick there is to find a county where it's possible, right? Like this county, it's possible. Not all counties is that possible in Tennessee. And that's the caution. So you went on it. What's available around us right now for sale, like from the land standpoint?
I didn't really look outside of this county, but I mean, I found a couple of properties that were 70 some odd acres for $250 to $350. More than I would like to pay, but prices go up and they ain't gonna come back down. So
yeah,
at least not by a whole lot.
Yeah. And having lived in a camper for a few weeks now, it will be cold this winter if I stay in the camper for the winter, but that's not the plan. But it could be made better. And I think taking a camper onto raw land is not a terrible thing. And 5 storage containers for all my crap. There would be a great reckoning if that happened. But here's the thing. So that vision, we're pretty aligned on what the vision would be, aren't we?
Mostly, yeah.
Mostly, yeah. What are we not aligned on?
I don't know. I mean, we have some minor differences of opinion on little things, but for the most part, I mean,
how would we
big
roll it
picture
out? Would we
stuff.
just build the event center and you live in that and I live in a camper? Or how would that look?
I don't know.
Or would you get a camper too?
No, I mean, if I had to have something immediately, probably during the whole process of buying the property and selling this one, I would probably build a shed that is within specs to be moved, so that once the sale was finalized, it's like, take that and drop it right there. And then I've got, at least a spot with a bed and a sink and a stove and some lights and some cabinets. And then after I build whatever else I wanted, then that just becomes either tiny house or take the counters out and it turns into a storage building, whatever.
Yeah. And I'm pretty happy with my vintage camper right now.
Okay.
I like it. And you can cook in it, in theory. I only cook in a crock pot in it right now, but we haven't turned the propane on, have we?
Mm-hmm.
No. Anyway, well, with all that in mind, we've been putting a lot into the homestead here. Like, it's been kickstarted, like it's been on crack for a few years. And especially this year really been on crack. With that vision in mind, if money's not an object, what should we be doing here? What would we do anything differently here than what we're focusing on right now? What would you do?
I mean, if money wasn't an option, then yeah, absolutely. It's like, I need a crew of dudes for like 2 to 4 weeks, and there's some other buildings on the property that need new roof, need new studs, need this, need that, new electric in the workshop. So if money wasn't an option, we'd go full throttle on that. But then there's also the option of,
like, would we just, are any buildings in our way that we just bowl over and not have them there anymore because the only reason we're working on them is they are where they are?
The only one I would say that I would possibly, quote, bulldoze, and I wouldn't even fully bulldoze it, is I would strip the pump house down to the slab and kind of rebuild from the ground up and make that building a little bit better for what it's actually being used for, as opposed to what it presently is. And then the workshop as well, like, I would not bulldoze the workshop, but it needs some serious repair work, and I would change the way the doors are in the front and extend the roof line all the way down the little concrete slab in front of it, so that you end up with a place to park 4-wheelers and lawnmowers and extra vehicles and so forth.
What about like the event center? Because I'm looking at getting roll down doors for the Taj Mahal. Would it make more sense to have classes up in my house and I move out of here?
I mean, there are a number of possibilities that we can look at with that, because something else that I actually have thought about since we started this whole conversation was the possibility of this becoming the event center and you moving into the cabin. If that was, I have no idea whether you would want to or not, but it's an option.
Mm-hmm. Would that make more sense than just building the cabin into an event center?
I don't know. I mean, I think because the perk with doing the cabin as the event center is there's, I guess, technically 2 walls that were built after the cabin was built that would get ripped out, which means that they're easy to rip out because they're already put in afterward. And then you leave the bathroom, reconfigure the counter for the kitchen. I would move the stove over underneath the window and put in a bigger sink. And then if you wanted to have, a canning demonstration, you just turn the classroom around and you've got the stove and everything right there. And you've got a bathroom that's fully functional. The possibility for smaller events that people could use that shower.
Yeah, we have to be careful with the septic use no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
But if money wasn't an object, septic could be redone.
That septic can be extended a good deal.
Yeah. So where would you go?
I have a number of places that I could plop something on. So it is one consideration that, like, even some of the spots that I'm looking at where, like, if I could build a whole cabin, it's like, I don't know, 50, 60 yards as opposed to the 21 from my front door to your back door. That is a known distance.
How fast can you run that far?
Pretty quick. Especially when it's raining. Like it's pouring down rain. That is very convenient. So pushing back to, 50 or 100 yards, it's when it's cold and it's raining and I don't want to, it's like, that's one thing. But, the other aspect too is like, we were looking at putting a barn over here. It's like, well, I'm going to build back there. Maybe we put a barn further back and we reconfigure how we do where we have animals, because that's another very convenient thing is I usually have a cup of coffee on the screened-in porch, and during my second cup of coffee, I walk off the screened-in porch and the rabbits are right there, and I sit there and check on the rabbits while I'm having a cup of coffee. And then that's something that I don't have to do later in the day. So that's, another thing to take into consideration is, how we're running animals, which that would also push the animals further back on the property instead of everything being in your front yard.
But my front yard is where all the things are. He's trying to redefine my zones as part of this discussion.
No, talking about relocating my zones.
Yeah, right. So what would we do? So right now we run the sheep on 16 acres that's owned by somebody else. What would we do to accommodate that person deciding they no longer want sheep on their property?
If they no longer want sheep on their property, we're either probably going down to 2 or 3 ewes and no rams, or we're going to have to buy something else in the holler, because I am not driving out of the holler to go take care of sheep, and we don't have enough here for more than, I would say, 3.
Hey, baby, want to relocate my zones? Sorry. Everybody sends me hey, baby stuff now. It's cracking me up. Yeah. I wonder if we could buy 10 acres from the person who owns property behind me.
Possible.
Would that be good for sheep?
No.
Not at all?
Not directly behind you, no.
Okay.
I'm looking at that. I'm actually looking really hard at that property because it wraps all the way behind where we're running sheep right now. And there is stuff further up that would be excellent for sheep. And so it's kind of one of those things. Like yesterday when I went over to put the girls to bed, I went all the way up to the top of the hill because you can see a good stretch of that. I think it's 78 acres. So I was kind of looking at, okay, what is the terrain actually like? How much rock is there? What kind of trees are out here? What's the grade of everything? And it's like, okay, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. We could clear cut that part and so forth and so on. So I think if I was going to try to buy part of that property, I would probably be trying to buy the whole property. And then if there was a section that for whatever reason we didn't want, then we could sell off a part, or I'm also looking at other ways to, kind of use the property to pay for itself.
Yeah. Well, does this mean I should move?
I don't know.
What do you think?
No, I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
Do
you want to move?
I'm still in the running of all of the hypotheticals, and like what it boils down to for me is, yes, I am like, there is an attachment to this property, but at the same time, just my personality, I like building things, and you're gonna offer me 20 to 100 acres that's basically a blank slate to build whatever I want instead of trying to rehab what's here, especially with all of the knowledge that I have now after doing this for 4 years. It's like, oh, give me some money and turn me loose.
So my thought right now with all of this is Taj Mahal makes a great event space.
Yeah.
And we could make it so you could flow into my living room for classes and back out. And actually, the way that's designed, it already works even if I stay living here.
Yeah.
What doesn't work great is where my pool's going to go. And my studio is non-ideal. Like, we are in my guest room right now, which means if somebody sleeps over, they're like right on that bed on the other side of this monitor. And I would love to have a dedicated studio space, all of which is doable with what I have right now. I actually kind of like the idea of turning where you live into an indoor event space and having like the indoor part of events there and feeding and hanging out under Taj Mahal and down there, which then gives us like somewhere where we can have the late night people who stay up singing karaoke separated from the people who just want to sit around the fire pit and talk. It gives you a little bit more space to spread out. And somebody's saying we should move towards Camden. We'll see.
I actually did just see a property at Camden.
Yeah, that it's possible a second property would happen at Camden too.
Yeah.
But that means you got to go somewhere. What do you think about just building your off-grid dream here? And trying to get some property around us that expands the acreage.
Yeah, I've actually got a couple of spots that I am looking at that are close enough. And I think there's enough square footage with a little bit of creativity that would make a pretty epic cabin. So it's definitely something that I'm looking at. It would just, the way that I would want to do it, it's going to take a little bit of time and it's going to take a little bit of money.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like with all of this in mind, after this phase of the house remodel is done, that the next focus is getting the workshop space completely redone with the overhang for the four-wheelers, so we stop having those up under Taj Mahal all the time, where they will end up anyway, just for the record, because he drives it up here and then wants to come in my house, right? Yeah, but the lawnmower at least cannot be in my face. Yeah, see that look on his face? He's like, yeah, we can park the stuff down there, but I'm not going to park the stuff down there. You like totally look guilty right now.
Oh, I know I'm guilty because it's a very convenient covered spot. So it's like we get a different covered spot, then I'll start parking under that.
Sure you will. Except for that the coffee maker's up here. I'll have to put a coffee maker down there if it's going to even work.
Coffee maker fixed.
Okay. Anyway, so I think it actually makes sense to get that done first because that gives us a place to operate from for anything else. And I actually kind of think that turning the cabin into more of an event space makes sense.
Yeah.
That's what I think. Okay, I got a few questions from the live stream, guys. We're going to take your questions and then wrap up for the day. I wanted to show you what that conversation is like. Because even if you are in the perfect place, having that outside of your... So here's the issue with the hauler. There are parameters here. There are already buildings. There is limited space. It's like you can only do what you can do here. And so when I make decisions, sometimes I'm like, well, these are the boundaries. So make decisions based on the boundaries. This discussion went outside the boundaries to another property, and then we can bring it back to this property and make that decision. If I found the perfect property, would I move? Maybe, but like I would have to have enough money to move and get it done quickly and not have to go through 16 more years of blood, sweat, and tears to get it to even where it is now. And that's my parameter. Like, I don't want to go build a new property that's going to take 2 decades. I might be dead in 2 decades. I probably won't be, but you never know. And I want to have time to enjoy where I live. I want to be able to enjoy where I live. So this model discussion, my intention with sharing this with y'all is that you can have these conversations about your homestead too, that you've been on for a decade, or your new one that you got that wasn't originally a homestead, but it's 5 or 6 acres and you've got a house here and a chicken coop there and all those things. If you're able to take yourself out of the boundaries and think, what do I really want? And how do I want it to be? How am I going to build it over here in this hypothetical place? And then look at, okay, well, what do I have? And how does that change that? And how do I still get to those goals? Like I've got suggestions from Rebecca about how I can have a studio, right? With just getting another camper on property. It's actually super helpful because then it avoids the, I built it this way, but that didn't work. I built it that way, but that actually costs more time and money than just going big and taking out all your floor joists this year rather than building your cabinets in your kitchen, which is what we've done. Like having that set up that way made a lot more sense, even though I'm not finishing my kitchen all the way this year. What I'm doing is I'm fixing foundational issues, and I've got my second bathroom is framed back in because there used to be 2 bathrooms here and we had to tear one out. And I was like, well, heck, I'm going to add a shower so that you can walk straight into the shower and not climb up over the clawfoot tub, which is not always easy to do. Okay. Jen says, if you sold the hauler, would you keep base camp? I probably would. Alternatively, I could sell base camp and use the money to do stuff here. So there's kind of like two sides to that coin, but I like having control of base camp, which is that close to me from a noisy neighbor standpoint, because we don't have noisy neighbors there, and that's nice. K-Bonk says, consider clear Roman shades versus roll down doors. Maybe. I did. I think the walls go down under Taj Mahal when it's cold out, so that might work. If I roll down those glass doors in the summer, then Taj Mahal becomes even hotter than it already is because it has a clear roof. And that makes it into a greenhouse in the summer. So I've been sort of more thinking either some way that barn doors come across, like, you know what I'm talking about, but they need to accordion out so that I have that exposure or something. So I'm playing with ideas, because last year we just hung a billboard tarp, and that's probably what will happen this year if we have rain at the spring workshop. What is the building /shed behind your house being used for? Coffee storage. That is where I store my coffee beans because they will not fit in the roasting shack. And I mean, something we could do if we wanted to start building the event space is have him turn that into a tiny cabin that he lives in for a bit. But I feel like it's better for Tactical to put all of his efforts, if he's going to build his own cabin on my property, to build the one he wants, which, you know, will take some time and some earthworks.
Oh, first thing that's happening is an excavator's coming in.
Anyway, I don't see any other questions, guys. If you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, you can do it in two ways. One, get your coffee at hollowroast.com. Two, consider becoming a member. Head over to livingfreeintennessee.com to find out more. With that, go out, make it a great week.